The bullet struck the weathered post beside Meredith Kane's head, sending splinters flying as she ducked behind the wagon wheel. Dry dust coated her throat, and the horizon before her stretched endless and empty, just like the years that had fallen behind her. Montana Territory, 1883. Summer was fading fast, and Meredith knew better than most that winter showed no mercy in these parts. 5 years she'd been running the failing Kane homestead alone, ever since influenza had taken both her parents in a single, merciless week. At 23, she'd grown as hard as the frozen ground she fought each spring, trying to coax life from soil that seemed determined to yield nothing but heartache. "Come on out, Miss Kane." The voice belonged to Edgar Walton, owner of the Territorial Bank and the man who held the papers to her land. "You can't hide forever. This property's coming to me one way or another." Meredith checked the rifle she'd grabbed when she'd spotted the riders approaching. 2 bullets left. Not enough to fend off Walton and his 3 hired guns. Pride told her to stand and fight, but reason reminded her that dying wouldn't save the homestead. "1 week, Walton," she shouted. "The law gives me 1 more week," laughter echoed across the yard. "Law don't mean much out here, sweetheart. But I'm feeling generous. We'll be back, and next time we won't be firing warning shots." She remained crouched until the sound of hoofbeats faded, then slowly rose, brushing the dust from her worn dress. The ranch house, little more than a 2-room cabin with a leaning porch, stood defiant against the backdrop of pine-covered hills. It wasn't much, but it was everything she had left. Inside, Meredith dropped into her father's chair, her gaze falling on the framed daguerreotype of her parents on their wedding day. Her mother's smile held a warmth Meredith could hardly remember feeling anymore. "What would you do?" she whispered to the silent image. The answer came in the morning, not from ghosts but from necessity. She would ride to Silver Creek, the nearest town of any consequence. Maybe someone there would hire a woman who could ride, shoot, and work harder than most men. The alternative was unthinkable, becoming one of the saloon girls or worse. Dawn brought frost that crunched beneath her boots as she saddled Penny, the aging mare that had been her companion through the worst years. The air bit at her cheeks, a premature taste of the winter that would soon blanket everything. Meredith secured her meager belongings, a change of clothes, her mother's locket, the last of the cornmeal, and 43 cents before mounting. She took one final look at the homestead, memorizing the way morning light glinted off the windows. Then she turned Penny toward Silver Creek and didn't look back. The journey took most of the day, the temperature dropping steadily as afternoon shadows lengthened. By the time the scattered buildings of Silver Creek appeared on the horizon, Meredith's fingers had gone numb inside her threadbare gloves, and her breath formed clouds that dispersed in the wind. Silver Creek had grown since she'd last visited. The railroad had finally pushed through, bringing with it new businesses and fortune seekers. The main street bustled with activity, freight wagons loaded with timber, miners spending their earnings, and women in dresses finer than anything Meredith had ever owned. She dismounted outside the general store, tying Penny to the hitching post. Her legs trembled from the long ride and the gnawing hunger in her stomach. The last thing she'd eaten was a biscuit at sunrise. The bell above the door jingled as she entered. The store's warmth enveloped her like an embrace, momentarily dulling the constant ache of cold that had settled in her bones months ago. Behind the counter, a portly man with mutton chop whiskers looked up from his ledger. "Help you, miss?" "I'm looking for work," Meredith said, straightening her shoulders despite her exhaustion. "Any kind of honest work." The storekeeper, Mr. Fulton, according to the sign over the register, assessed her with eyes that had seen every kind of desperation. Not much call for female labor round here except at the Golden Spur, he said, nodding toward the saloon across the street. Though Mrs. Abernathy at the boarding house might need help with laundry. Meredith nodded, trying not to show her disappointment. Thank you, sir. She turned to leave when the bell jingled again. A rush of cold air announced another customer, and Meredith found herself face to face with the tallest man she'd ever seen. His shadow seemed to fill the entire doorway. Dressed in a sheepskin coat, worn denim and dust-covered boots, he carried himself with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to hard work and open spaces. When he removed his hat, revealing hair the color of wheat fields in late summer, Meredith caught herself staring. "Afternoon, Mr. Fulton," the stranger said, his voice carrying the slight drawl of someone who'd spent time further south. "Hayden, thought you weren't due back from Cheyenne until next week." The storekeeper's entire demeanor brightened. "Got my business done early." The man Hayden glanced at Meredith, and she was struck by eyes the precise shade of a mountain lake in spring. "Madam," he acknowledged with a slight nod. She returned the greeting automatically, suddenly conscious of her travel-stained clothes and wind-tangled hair. "Hayden Richardson just bought the old Caldwell spread," Fulton explained to Meredith. "Been fixing it up these past months. And still got plenty to do," Hayden added, turning his attention back to the storekeeper. "Need supplies. The list is longer than usual." As he handed over a paper, Meredith took the opportunity to slip toward the door. The last thing she needed was to waste time admiring a man who probably had a wife waiting at home. She had to find work before nightfall. "Miss," Hayden's voice stopped her, couldn't help overhearing. "You're looking for work," she turned slowly, wariness tempering her desperation. "Yes. What kind of work can you do?" Meredith lifted her chin. "I've run a homestead for 5 years on my own. I can cook, clean, mend, garden. I know livestock. I can break horses if needed, though I prefer gentling them." Something that might have been respect flickered in his eyes. "My housekeeper left last week. Couldn't stand the isolation. I need someone who can manage the house while I focus on getting the ranch operational before winter sets in fully." Meredith hesitated, unsure if living alone with a strange man would be proper. But then again, propriety wouldn't keep her fed or housed. Hayden seemed to read her thoughts. "It's a proper position, room and board plus wages. Mrs. Abernathy can vouch for my character." Mr. Fulton nodded. "Hayden's good people, miss. You could do worse." The decision wasn't difficult when the alternative was begging on the streets. "When would you need me to start?" "Today, if possible. I'm heading back once I get these supplies." An hour later, with Penny tethered behind Hayden's wagon, they left Silver Creek behind. Meredith learned his name was Hayden Richardson, that he'd come from Texas with dreams of establishing a horse breeding operation, and that he was, indeed, unmarried. "Lost my folks in the war," he explained as they traveled. "Been on my own since I was 16. Worked cattle drives, saved every penny. This ranch is everything I've worked for." "Why Montana?" she asked, genuinely curious why anyone would choose this harsh, beautiful land voluntarily. "The water," he said simply. "Clear, cold, abundant. Perfect for raising the kind of horses I want to breed. And the mountains," he gestured to the distant peaks. "Something about them calls to a man." The Richardson Ranch came into view as the sun began its descent, a sturdy 2-story house nestled in a sheltered valley, with corrals, a barn, and several outbuildings. It was larger than Meredith had expected, and better maintained than her family's homestead had been even in its prime. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "It will be," Hayden replied, a note of determination in his voice. "Come spring." But spring seemed impossibly far away as Hayden showed her to her room, a clean, pleasant space at the back of the house with a real feather mattress and a small wood stove. "Get settled," he said, leaving her at the doorway. "Kitchen's stocked. I'll tend the horses." Alone, Meredith sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the day's sudden turn. She'd left her home expecting to find herself destitute, only to land in a position that offered shelter, food, and dignity. It seemed too good to be true. Experience had taught her that fortune rarely smiled on the Kanes. Still, as she washed the travel grime from her face and hands, she allowed herself a small measure of hope. Perhaps this was the chance she needed, just enough time to save some money before Walton seized her land. That evening, she cooked a simple meal of beans, bacon, and biscuits. Hayden ate with the appetite of a man who'd spent his day at physical labor, expressing appreciation for hot food he hadn't had to prepare himself. "Been living on coffee and jerky more days than not," he admitted. "That won't do if you're working from sunrise to sunset," Meredith said. "A man needs proper meals. And a woman," his question caught her off guard. "What does a woman need, Miss Kane?" The question hung between them, unexpectedly intimate. Meredith busied herself with clearing the table. "I suppose the same," she finally answered. "Food, shelter, purpose." Hayden nodded slowly. "Fair enough, though I'd add one thing to that list." "What's that?" "Respect," he said simply. "You'll have that here. Your work, your privacy, your thoughts, I respect them all." In the days that followed, Meredith settled into a routine. She rose before dawn to start the fires and prepare breakfast before Hayden headed out to work. The house, while solid, needed a woman's touch. She swept, scrubbed, mended curtains, and organized the kitchen to her liking. At midday, she would bring lunch to wherever Hayden was working, often the corral, where he was training 2 young stallions. She found herself lingering to watch his methods, appreciating the patience he showed with the spirited animals. "You're good with them," she observed one crisp afternoon, passing him a plate of rabbit stew. "Had a Comanche friend once. Taught me horses respond better to gentleness than force," he explained, his eyes never leaving the chestnut stallion circling the corral. "Same as people, I reckon." Something in his words touched a place inside her that had long been frozen. She'd grown so accustomed to hard work, hard winters, hard choices that gentleness felt almost foreign. As October deepened toward November, the days grew shorter and the nights colder. Meredith found herself watching the western horizon each evening, dreading the approach of true winter. Hayden worked with increasing urgency, reinforcing the barn, stockpiling firewood, and preserving food. "First real snow could come any day," he said one evening as they sat by the fire. He'd taken to spending an hour with her after supper, sometimes talking, sometimes just sharing the warmth and companionable silence. "The homestead won't survive another winter without repairs," she murmured, more to herself than to him. Hayden looked up from the bridle he was mending. "Your place. You mentioned it's in trouble." Meredith hadn't intended to share her troubles, but something about the crackling fire and Hayden's steady presence loosened her tongue. She told him about the mortgage, the failing crops, Walton's threats, and her desperate choice to leave rather than face him empty-handed when he returned. "The week's up tomorrow," she concluded. "By now, Walton's probably already claimed it." Hayden set aside his work. "Maybe not. Banks have procedures, paperwork. Takes time to officially seize property." "What difference does it make?" Bitterness crept into her voice. "I can't pay what I owe. How much is it? $200. An impossible sum. Hayden was quiet for a long moment. "I could advance you the money against your wages." Meredith's head snapped up. "I couldn't accept that. It's not charity. You'd work it off." "It would take years," she protested. "You have somewhere better to be." A hint of a smile played at the corner of his mouth. The offer tempted her more than she wanted to admit, but experience had taught her to be wary of debts and dependencies, especially with men. "I'll consider it," she said finally. "Thank you for the offer." That night, sleep eluded her. The thought of her homestead, her parents' legacy in Walton's hands, filled her with restless anger. But equally disturbing was her growing awareness of Hayden Richardson as more than just her employer. She'd noticed the way his hands, calloused from work yet surprisingly gentle, moved with purpose and care, whether handling horses or passing her a cup of coffee. She'd caught herself watching him when he wasn't looking, admiring the strong line of his jaw and the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. Such thoughts were dangerous. She couldn't afford to develop feelings for a man who had only offered her employment and a business arrangement. Besides, what did she have to offer someone like Hayden? A woman with no dowry, no family connections, and a failing homestead was hardly a catch for a man building a promising future. Morning brought the season's first snow light flakes that danced in the air before melting on contact with the ground. Hayden declared it would be a day for indoor tasks, and spent hours in the barn while Meredith baked bread and started a stew that would simmer all day. By afternoon, the snow was falling more heavily, sticking to the ground and transforming the landscape into a white expanse that glittered in the occasional breaks of sunlight. Meredith stood at the kitchen window, watching the familiar change with a mixture of dread and resignation. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Hayden's voice startled her. She hadn't heard him enter. "Beautiful, yes, but deadly too." "Only if you fight it," he said, coming to stand beside her. "Winter has its purpose, rest, renewal beneath the surface." "Easy to say when you have a solid roof and full storerooms," she replied, immediately regretting the sharpness in her tone. But Hayden didn't take offense. "True enough. I've known hungry winters." He was quiet for a moment. "Made my decision about your homestead." Meredith turned to face him, heart suddenly pounding. "And I'm riding to Silver Creek tomorrow. If Walton hasn't filed the final paperwork, I'll pay off your debt." Hayden, he held up a hand. "With conditions." Of course there would be conditions. Men like Walton always had conditions. She steeled herself. "What conditions?" "You stay through spring planting. Help me get this place in order. Then, if you want to return to your homestead, you can with no debt to me." Or he hesitated. Or you consider making a more permanent arrangement here." Meredith frowned. "What kind of arrangement?" The faintest flush colored his cheeks. "That would be for us to discuss when the time comes. No pressure either way." Before she could respond, a sharp gust rattled the windows, drawing their attention back to the strengthening storm. "Won't be riding anywhere tomorrow if this keeps up," Hayden observed. "Might have to wait a day or two." The storm indeed intensified throughout the evening, bringing wind that howled down the chimney and snow that piled in drifts against the house. By morning, the world outside was transformed pristine white, stretching in every direction, the outbuildings mere shadows in the swirling snow. Hayden spent the day checking on the horses and reinforcing the barn doors against the wind. Meredith kept the fires burning, grateful for the solid walls and roof overhead. As evening approached, they found themselves again by the hearth, the howling storm making the warmth and light inside feel like a precious sanctuary. "Tell me about Texas," Meredith said, breaking a comfortable silence. "I've never been further than Fort Benton." Hayden's expression softened with memory. "Different kind of beautiful. Rolling hills, live oaks spreading wide, wildflowers carpeting the fields come spring." His voice took on a storyteller's cadence as he described cattle drives under star-filled skies, swimming in rivers warm enough to enjoy, and peach orchards heavy with fruit. "It sounds like paradise," Meredith said. "Why leave it?" A shadow crossed his face. After the war, things changed. Too many bad memories, too many graves. He stared into the flames, needed a fresh start somewhere the land still felt clean. Impulsively, Meredith reached out, touching his hand lightly. "I understand." His fingers curled around hers, warm and strong. For a moment, neither spoke, the simple human contact saying more than words could express. The storm raged for 3 days, keeping them contained within the house except for Hayden's necessary trips to tend the animals. They settled into a rhythm of shared meals, shared work, and shared conversations that grew increasingly personal as the hours passed. Meredith learned that Hayden had fought for the Confederacy not out of political conviction, but because his home was in Texas. He'd lost his younger brother at Shiloh and carried the grief like a stone in his chest. He spoke of his dreams for the ranch breeding horses that combined beauty, intelligence, and endurance with a passion that lit his eyes. In turn, she found herself sharing memories she'd locked away, her mother's voice singing her to sleep, her father teaching her to fish in the creek that ran through their property, the devastating winter when she'd nearly given up but found the strength to continue for one more day, and then another. On the 4th morning, they awoke to silence. The storm had passed, leaving a transformed world outside. Sunlight sparkled on snow piled waist-high in some places. Hayden spent hours clearing paths to the barn and corrals while Meredith prepared supplies for his journey to Silver Creek. "The road might not be passable yet," she cautioned as she packed food for him. "I know shortcuts," he assured her, "and I have good reason to try." He left at dawn the following day, promising to return by nightfall if possible, or the next day if the going proved difficult. Meredith watched until horse and rider disappeared into the vast whiteness, then turned back to the house that suddenly felt much emptier. The day crawled by. She occupied herself with mending, baking, and reorganizing the pantry, all the while listening for hoofbeats that didn't come. As darkness fell, she kept a lamp burning in the window and tried not to worry about all the things that could befall a lone rider in this unforgiving country. She was dozing in a chair by the fire when a sound jolted her awake, the distinctive crunch of footsteps in snow, followed by the heavy thud of boots on the porch. The door swung open, bringing a swirl of cold air and Hayden, snow-covered but grinning. "You did it," she asked, rising to her feet. "Just in time," he confirmed, stamping snow from his boots. "Walton had the paperwork drawn up but not filed. Wasn't happy to see me, but money talks. Your homestead is safe, Miss Kane." Relief flooded through her, followed by an overwhelming gratitude that brought tears to her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you. You can start by calling me Hayden instead of Mr. Richardson," he suggested, his smile warming his frost-reddened face. "And maybe some of that coffee I smell." Over steaming cups, he recounted his journey, the difficult ride through drifts that sometimes reached his horse's chest, his confrontation with a surprised and irritated Walton, and the satisfaction of walking out with the mortgage papers marked "paid in full." "I had them file proper documentation with the territorial office," he added. "No one can contest your ownership now." "Our agreement stands," Meredith said firmly. "I'll work to repay you. Never doubted it." He reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. "There's something else. Stopped by the post office on my way out of town. Letter for you." Puzzled, Meredith took the envelope. Mail was a rarity in her life. Who would be writing to her? The return address showed a law office in Helena. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. As she read, her expression changed from confusion to disbelief. "What is it?" Hayden asked, concern evident in his voice. "My uncle," she whispered. "My mother's brother. I've never met him. There was some falling out before I was born. He died 3 months ago." She looked up, stunned. He left me $500. Hayden let out a low whistle. Seems fortune's finally smiling on you, Meredith. I can pay you back immediately, she realized. I don't have to, she stopped, suddenly uncertain. Don't have to stay. Hayden finished for her, his voice carefully neutral. I didn't mean. She took a deep breath. This changes things, does it? He set down his cup and leaned forward. You still have a homestead that needs work before it's habitable again. Winter's just beginning, and I still need help here. But our arrangement was based on necessity. Now I have choices. Then choose, he said simply. But know that I hope you'll stay not out of necessity, but because you want to. The days that followed carried a new tension. Meredith found herself watching Hayden more closely, trying to discern his true feelings. Did he want her to stay merely as a housekeeper, or was there something more growing between them? His kindness and respect had never wavered, but he maintained a careful distance, as if afraid of influencing her choice. December arrived with bitter cold and short days. They developed evening rituals to combat the darkness, reading aloud from Hayden's small collection of books, playing checkers by lamplight, sharing stories of Christmases past. Sometimes Hayden would play his harmonica, simple tunes that filled the house with unexpected warmth. One evening, as they sat before the fire, Meredith finally addressed what had been on her mind. When you said I could consider a more permanent arrangement here, she began. What did you mean exactly? Hayden set aside the boot he'd been oiling. I meant that a ranch needs more than one person to thrive, that a house needs more than a housekeeper to become a home. Are you proposing a business partnership? She asked, needing clarity. A smile touched his lips. I'm proposing the possibility of something that might start as friendship and grow into more, if that's where our hearts lead us. You hardly know me, she pointed out. I know enough, he countered. I know you're strong enough to survive alone, but wise enough to accept help when needed. I know you care for animals and treat them with kindness. I know your hands are capable of both hard work and gentle touches. He paused. And I know that when you smile, really smile, it feels like spring breaking through winter. Meredith's breath caught. No one had ever spoken to her this way. I'm not asking for promises, Hayden continued. Just time. Time for you to decide if I might be worth choosing, even when you have the freedom to go elsewhere. Before she could respond, a plaintive whinny from the barn broke the moment. Hayden rose immediately. Something's wrong, he said, reaching for his coat. That's Athena. She's not due to foal for weeks yet. Meredith followed him into the biting cold, hurrying across the yard to the barn. Inside, the mare that Hayden prized above all his horses was lying on her side in the straw, sides heaving. Early labor, Hayden confirmed grimly after examining her. This isn't good. The next hours blurred together as they fought to save both mare and foal. Meredith worked alongside Hayden, following his instructions, fetching water, holding lanterns, and offering calm words to the distressed animal. When Hayden had to physically intervene to correct the foal's position, Meredith supported Athena's head, stroking her neck and murmuring encouragement. Near dawn, their efforts were rewarded with the arrival of a spindly-legged colt, smaller than he should have been, but alive. Hayden helped clear the newborn's airways while Meredith tended to the exhausted mother. He's a fighter, Hayden said, watching the foal struggle to stand on wobbly legs. Not sure he'll make it, but he's trying. Like his mother, Meredith observed. She didn't give up. They stayed in the barn through the morning, ensuring the colt nursed successfully, and that Athena remained stable. Finally, confident they'd done all they could, they trudged back to the house, exhausted but relieved. As Meredith prepared a much-needed breakfast, she reflected on the night's events. The way they'd worked together without needing many words, anticipating each other's needs. sharing the burden of worry and the relief of success it felt right in a way few things in her life had. "Penny for your thoughts," Hayden said, accepting the plate she handed him. "I was thinking about the foal," she answered. "So determined to live, even though everything was against him. Reminds me of someone else I know," he said, his gaze warm on her face. "I've been thinking about what you said last night," she continued, gathering her courage. "About time. And I'd like that time to see where this leads, but I need you to understand something." "What's that?" "I can't be a charity case or an obligation. If I stay, it has to be as someone with something to contribute, not just someone you rescued." "Meredith," he said, his voice serious. "Last night I couldn't have saved that foal without you. This ranch, this life I'm building, it's better with you in it. Not because you cook or clean, but because you see what needs doing and do it without being asked. Because you care about things that matter." His words warmed something deep inside her that had been cold for so long she'd forgotten it could be otherwise. Christmas approached, bringing with it a week of clear, brutally cold weather. The foal, whom they'd named Survivor, was defying odds by growing stronger each day. Meredith spent hours in the barn, talking to the horses, particularly a gentle mare named Willow who seemed to seek out her company. "She likes you," Hayden observed one afternoon, finding Meredith brushing the mare's dappled coat. "She was mistreated before I got her. Doesn't trust most people." "We understand each other," Meredith said simply. "Sometimes life makes you wary." "And sometimes," Hayden said, stepping closer, "life gives you reasons to trust again." Their eyes met, and something shifted between them, a barrier lowering, a possibility opening. Later, Meredith would remember this as the moment she admitted to herself that what she felt for Hayden had grown beyond gratitude or friendship. On Christmas Eve, Hayden disappeared into the workshop behind the barn for hours, refusing to let Meredith see what he was doing. She took advantage of his absence to prepare a special dinner, and to wrap the gift, she'd made him a new scarf knitted from wool she'd found in the attic, dyed with berries she'd preserved in the fall. The house filled with the aroma of roasting rabbit and baking bread. Meredith had even used precious sugar to make a small cake, decorated with the last of the dried cherries. She put on her one good dress, faded but clean, and arranged her hair with unusual care. When Hayden returned, snowflakes clinging to his hat and shoulders, he stopped in the doorway, staring at the transformed kitchen with its table set with the good dishes and a pine bough centerpiece she'd gathered and decorated with red yarn bows. "Merry Christmas," she said shyly. "Meredith," he breathed, "this is beautiful." During dinner, they exchanged stories of family traditions, his mother's insistence on reading the Christmas story before gifts could be opened, her father's custom of hiding small presents around the house for her to find. "I have something for you," he said when they'd finished eating. "Two things, actually." From his pocket, he produced a small package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. "It was my mother's," he explained as Meredith stared at it in disbelief. "I want you to have it." "Hayden, I couldn't possibly, please," he said, his eyes earnest. "It should be worn, not hidden away in a drawer, and I'd like to think of you wearing something that belonged to her." With trembling hands, she allowed him to fasten it around her neck. The metal was cool against her skin, but quickly warmed. "It's perfect on you," he said softly. "But that's not all. Come with me." Puzzled, she followed him outside to the workshop. Inside, illuminated by lantern light, stood a beautiful rocking chair, its wood polished to a soft gleam. "You made this," she whispered, running her fingers over the curved arms. "Been working on it whenever you were busy elsewhere. Every ranch house needs a good rocking chair." He hesitated. "I thought maybe someday you might want it for more than just sitting." The implication wasn't lost on her: a chair for rocking babies, for a future that included a family. Their family. "It's the most beautiful gift I've ever received," she said, blinking back tears. That night, sitting in her new chair beside the fire, Meredith gave Hayden his scarf. His delight seemed out of proportion to the simple gift, but she understood when he immediately wrapped it around his neck, declaring he'd wear it every day. "There's something else I'd like to give you," he said after a moment, "if you're willing to accept it." "What's that?" "A promise," he answered, taking her hand in his, "that I'll do everything in my power to make your life feel less like winter and more like spring. That these hands," he turned his palms upward, "will only ever touch you with gentleness." Meredith's heart thundered in her chest. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" "Not yet," he said with a small smile. "That question comes when we know each other better, when you're sure. This is just me telling you where my heart stands." She studied his face in the firelight, the honest eyes, the mouth that smiled so easily, the lines etched by sun and wind and life. "My heart," she said slowly, "is starting to remember what warmth feels like." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "That's enough for now." January brought a blizzard that kept them housebound for days, followed by a bitter cold snap that froze water solid within seconds of exposure. They developed a companionable routine, Hayden braving the elements to care for the animals, while Meredith kept the home fires burning, literally and figuratively. In the forced closeness, they learned each other's habits, preferences, and quirks. Hayden discovered that Meredith sang softly to herself when she thought no one was listening. She learned that he had a surprising talent for whittling, creating small animals and birds from scraps of wood during the long evenings. February arrived with a noticeable shift in their relationship. The careful distance Hayden had maintained began to dissolve. His hand would linger when passing her a cup, or he would brush a strand of hair from her face with gentle fingers. Meredith found herself seeking these small contacts, her body awakening to possibilities she'd never allowed herself to consider during her years of bare survival. One evening, as they sat reading by lamplight, Hayden suddenly looked up. "Would you like to visit your homestead when the snow begins to melt? See what needs to be done there?" The question caught her off guard. She'd thought of the Kane place often, but had deliberately pushed it from her mind, afraid to confront the decision she would eventually need to make. "I would," she said after a moment, "though I'm afraid of what I'll find." "We'll face it together," he promised. "Whatever condition it's in, we can make a plan." She questioned, "if you'll allow it." His eyes held hers. "Meredith, I don't want to pressure you, but I need you to know that whatever you decide about your homestead, I want you in my life." The declaration hung in the air between them. Meredith set aside her book and moved to kneel beside his chair, taking his hands in hers. "You've shown me kindness when I'd forgotten what it felt like," she said softly. "You've given me shelter, respect, and friendship when I needed them most. And now," she took a deep breath, "now I find myself wanting more than friendship." Hayden's fingers tightened around hers. "Are you certain?" In answer, Meredith rose slightly and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, then deepened as Hayden's arms came around her, drawing her closer. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "I've wanted to do that since the day you rode in during that snowstorm," she confessed. Hayden's laugh was warm against her cheek. "And I've wanted to since I first saw you standing in Fulton's store, looking like you could take on the world single-handed." Their courtship blossomed as winter began its slow retreat. March brought warmer days and colder nights, creating a crust on the snow that crackled underfoot. On clear days, they took short rides to check property boundaries and survey the land that would soon need attention. During one such ride, They stopped on a ridge overlooking a meadow where the snow was beginning to recede in patches, revealing hints of green beneath. "This will be covered in wildflowers come May," Hayden said, dismounting to stand beside Meredith. "Blues and yellows mostly. Some pink shooting stars near the creek." "I'd like to see that," she replied, trying to imagine the transformation. "You will." He helped her down from her horse, keeping his hands at her waist longer than necessary. "Meredith, there's something I need to ask you," her heart quickened. "Yes. When we visit your homestead next week, I want you to consider something." "What's that?" "The possibility of not choosing between the two properties but joining them." She frowned in confusion. "How would that work?" "Through marriage," he said simply. "My land borders yours to the east. Together, they'd make a formidable ranch. We could build something lasting, something to pass down someday." "Are you proposing to me for my land, Mr. Richardson?" she asked, keeping her tone light despite the sudden flutter in her chest. "I'm proposing because I've fallen in love with you," he answered, his eyes serious. "The land is secondary. If you wanted to sell your homestead and stay here, or sell this place and move there, or sell both and start fresh somewhere else, I'd agree to any of it, as long as we're together." Meredith stared at him, speechless. No one in her life had ever put her wishes first this way. "You don't have to answer now," he continued. "I just wanted you to know where my heart stands before we visit your old home." But Meredith already knew her answer. The months at Hayden's side had shown her what kind of man he was: steady, honest, kind, and stronger than anyone she'd ever known. She'd seen him nurse sick animals through the night, watched him give the last of his coffee to an unexpected visitor, witnessed his unwavering respect for her opinions and abilities. "Yes," she said, the word escaping on a breath. "Yes, you'll think about it," he clarified. "Yes, I'll marry you," she corrected, a smile spreading across her face. "Yes to joining our lands and our lives. Yes to building something lasting together." Joy transformed Hayden's expression. He lifted her off her feet, spinning her in a circle that sent snow flying from beneath their boots. When he set her down, his kiss was tender yet insistent, sealing their promise beneath the vast Montana sky. The journey to the Kane homestead the following week was both easier and more difficult than Meredith had anticipated. The snow had melted enough to make travel possible, though the ground was muddy in places and still frozen in others. Emotionally, however, she found herself increasingly tense as familiar landmarks appeared. "You're quiet," Hayden observed as they crested the final hill that would bring the homestead into view. "Memories," she explained. "Some good, some not, mostly wondering if I've changed as much as I feel I have." He reached across to squeeze her hand. "You're still the same strong woman I met in Fulton's store, just maybe not carrying quite as heavy a burden alone." When the cabin finally came into view, Meredith gasped. She'd expected deterioration after months of abandonment, but the reality was worse than she'd imagined. Part of the roof had collapsed, probably under the weight of January's heavy snow. The door hung crookedly from one hinge, and glass was missing from two windows. "Oh," she whispered, tears stinging her eyes despite her best efforts. Hayden dismounted quickly and came to help her down, his hands steadying her as her legs threatened to buckle. "I'm sorry, Meredith." They approached slowly. Inside was more devastation: water damage, animal tracks in the dust, her few remaining possessions scattered and ruined. On the wall, her parents' daguerreotype remained, though the glass was cracked and moisture had seeped in, blurring their faces. Meredith carefully removed it from the wall, cradling it against her chest. "This is all that matters anyway," she said. "They're not here. They're with me wherever I go." Hayden nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Do you want to salvage anything else?" They spent an hour collecting what could be saved: her mother's sewing box, miraculously intact in a trunk, her father's hunting knife, a quilt her grandmother had made that needed only washing and mending. Everything else they left behind, standing in the yard, looking back at the cabin that had been her entire world for so long. Meredith felt a strange mixture of grief and liberation. It would take months to make it habitable again, she said. We could do it, Hayden offered. If it's important to you, she shook her head. The memories will always be here, but my future, she turned to face him. My future is with you. They were married on the first day of May, 1884, in Silver Creek's small church. Mrs. Abernathy had helped Meredith alter a dress, and Mr. Fulton gave her away in the absence of family. The townspeople, many of whom had hardly known either of them months before, filled the pews, drawn by the romance of their story. Hayden wore a new suit and the scarf Meredith had knitted him. As they exchanged vows, his hands held hers with the gentle strength that had become her anchor in a world that had once seemed determined to wear her down. I promise to be a shelter in your winters and a companion in your springs, he said, adding his own words to the traditional vows. To treat you with gentleness and respect all the days of my life. Meredith, who had once thought herself incapable of tears, found them flowing freely as she responded, I promise to bring warmth to our home and hope to our future. To stand beside you through all seasons, as your partner and your wife. Their wedding night was a revelation. Hayden's tenderness dispelled Meredith's nervousness, and their joining became a natural extension of the trust and love that had grown between them through the long winter months. In his arms, she found a warmth that reached places inside her that had been frozen for so long she'd forgotten they existed. Spring brought transformation to more than just their relationship. The land around the ranch erupted in new-growth meadows carpeted with wildflowers just as Hayden had promised, trees budding, creeks swollen with snowmelt. They worked from dawn until dusk, planting gardens, repairing winter damage, and preparing for the arrival of new horses Hayden had arranged to purchase. They sold the Kane homestead to a young couple from Minnesota with dreams similar to the ones Meredith's parents had carried west. With the money, they built a larger stable and purchased additional breeding stock for what was quickly becoming known as one of the finest horse operations in the territory. By summer's height, Meredith discovered she was carrying their first child. Hayden's joy was boundless. He insisted she rest more, though she laughed and reminded him that generations of women had worked right up until their time came. Still, as her body changed, she found herself taking more moments to sit in the rocking chair he'd made, watching the ranch activities from the porch and imagining their child growing up in this place they'd built together. What are you thinking? Hayden asked one evening, finding her there as sunset painted the mountains gold. That when I met you, my life felt like endless winter, she said, taking his hand and placing it on her rounded belly where their child grew. Now look at us surrounded by life and growth. He knelt beside the chair, pressing a kiss to her palm. You brought spring to my life too, Meredith Richardson. Before you I had a house, now I have a home. Their daughter, Catherine Hope Richardson, was born on a crisp October day in 1884, entering the world with a lusty cry that made both her parents laugh through happy tears. She had her mother's determined chin and her father's clear blue eyes. She's perfect, Hayden whispered, cradling her with hands that looked too large against her tiny form yet handled her with exquisite care. She's the future we're building, Meredith replied, exhausted but radiant with joy. As winter approached once more, the Richardson ranch stood ready, barns filled with hay, storerooms stocked with preserved fruits and vegetables, wood piles stacked high against the coming cold. But this winter would be different from any Meredith had known before. This winter, she had a husband whose love warmed her more effectively than any fire. This winter, she had a daughter whose smile melted something inside her that she hadn't even realized was still frozen. This winter, she had a home filled with laughter and plans for the future. On the first snowy evening of the season, Hayden found Meredith standing at the window, Catherine sleeping in her arms. He wrapped his arms around them both, his chin resting on Meredith's shoulder as they watched white flakes dancing in the lamplight spilling from their windows. "Cold out there," he murmured. "But warm in here," she replied, leaning back against his solid strength. "Always will be," he promised, his gentle hands the hands that had brought spring and blossoms to her winter-hardened heart, drawing his family closer. "Always."